From Relay FM, this is Connected, episode 142. Today's show is brought to you by Squarespace and PDF Pen 9 from Smile. My name is Mike Hurley. I am joined by Mr. Stephen Hackett. Hello, Stephen Hackett.
Hello, Michael Hurley.
And the man of the hour, Mr. Federico Vicici. Ciao, Federico.
Ciao a tutti. Hello, hi.
Wow, that was a lot. There was a lot in that.
It was really not a lot. How are you?
I'm very well. How are you?
A little tired, but also happy that that it's over again.
So Federico published a really big article today, and video, and we're going to talk about that a little bit later on in the show. But before we do, Stephen requires that we discuss follow-up as part of his official contract that he signed.
I wrote it, and then I signed it, and it's just me.
In crayon.
Crayon, come on, man. So we've spoken a lot about Amazon's new Echoes, the Look, which has a camera and is all about fashion, and then the Echo Show, which is an Echo with a screen, and so it can display you information. It's a touch screen. You can interact with it. That ships, as we've discussed, in like 6 weeks or so, the very end of June. But there's been a lot of conversation around a sort of thing they slipped into all of this, and it's in existing Echoes as well in the app. Amazon kind of launched a messaging platform. So it works a couple of different ways depending on what devices you have. So I have an Echo Dot, for instance, here on my desk, just right there, a couple feet away. And I can send voice messages and receive voice messages through it or through the application. And if, for instance, Federico sends me one, the Echo will blink. The ring around it turns green. I didn't know what that meant. And so I just asked the Echo, blank, why are you green? And it told me, which is kind of an amazing moment of like, oh, it really understood what I meant. But there's been a lot of concern about privacy and like there's some weirdness here. There's an article over on The Verge outlining some of this. More or less, when you open the new Echo app on your iPhone, which has been redesigned, it's way nicer now, and you have to upload all your contacts, and it looks those contacts up. It says, these people have Echoes, you can talk to these people. Obviously, that's not super great, but a lot of people are doing it. I did it. Like, I give them my contacts. Sorry, if you're in my contact list.
Sorry, contacts.
But I want to see what this was like and be able to talk about it. But there's no way to block communication at this point that you don't want. So if someone is sending you messages and you don't want to hear from them, or they're being inappropriate or they're harassing you, there's no way to block those people as long as somebody has your phone number and this Echo mobile app, then they can reach you.
It's interesting that I don't see it in my application. Like, I can't see anything that talks about messages.
I think it's US only.
Feels like it must be US only. There you go.
Yeah.
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 So I guess the story here is, I mean, obviously there are issues with this, and there should be a way to block people. Some people have said it's a problem that anyone with your phone number can message you through this thing, and like, I don't see a huge problem with that, because if someone has your contact information, they can call your phone or send you an iMessage or send you an email. Yes, it's weird that the Echoes in your kitchen is going to light up green and make a noise. Like, that's a little bit different, but I do think they definitely need some mechanism to say, hey, this person, I do not want this person to be able to contact me via the Echo.
Yeah, I think that's the problem, really. It's not about anyone can contact you, because, anyone can call me if they have my phone number, and anyone can text me, anyone can come to my house and ring the doorbell. I don't think that's a problem. The problem is the kind of action that you can take to prevent that from happening over and over. So if someone comes to my house and rings my doorbell every 5 minutes, I'm going to go downstairs and take care of that. And if anyone starts calling me on my iPhone, I'm just going to block the number. Here in the Alexa app, there's no way to block anyone, and I think that's a problem, because with these communication systems where there's no two-way authentication, you have my phone number, you can call me, and this is the same concept. You have my phone number, you can ring my Echo speaker, but there's no blocking UI, there's no blocking feature. And I think Amazon needs to add that, and needs to, add settings to prevent people from being called all the time. I think it makes sense, and I'm not sure how you can ship a communication product today and not think of the blocking system. That just because anyone, it's gonna ask them today, and it just doesn't make any sense to me. I'm so surprised that Amazon had this kind of oversight.
So two things. One, they said that they're going to add it, right, after this story kind of caught a bit of heat. They said, we're sorry, we're working on it. The other thing, I've been thinking a lot about this. My initial feeling was definitely the same as you guys. It's like, this is just the way things are now. People can just contact you. If you give someone your contact information, right, they can contact you however. I'll tell you the thing that I've been thinking about that's been playing on my mind a little bit. When everybody bought the Amazon Echo, they didn't think it would ever do this. Mm-hmm. There was never an idea that this was going to be a device that people could start calling you on. I don't think anybody considered that as an option. And obviously Amazon didn't say it. So you bought this device and put it into your home. If you are a type of person who just doesn't want this, well, this is really frustrating because now this device has been updated without your desire, and now people can start calling you on it.
That is true.
I think that's the problem, where it's like, I was thinking like, well, look, every service now, like, people can contact you. But like, if you think about how you do this, you download the applications, right? Or whatever, or you have a phone, and you know that your phone is a communications device. That's why you bought it. And any communication apps you put on it will allow for people to communicate with you. But when we brought these canisters, these Echoes, and put them in our homes, they were purely, I'm going to communicate with you and you'll talk to Amazon. No one was ever talking back to me. But now people can start calling me. And it's not just on the Echo Show, right? Which is like, okay, if this new product has the calling in it, then you know. But everybody's Echoes were updated silently, right? And now people can start calling you. That's the thing that I find is different, because it's kind of like Trojan horsed this messaging system into the product, which I think is one of the difference makers of it.
Yeah, that's a good point.
That makes sense. Yeah, especially you buy a device with some kind of expectation, and then the Echo is the type of hardware that updates itself. You cannot even decide, I don't want this update. Like, I know people, for example, who the iOS interface changes and people do not update because they don't want the changes. Yeah. Here, changes are pushed upon you.
I would like it if you could just say, like, turn it off. I don't want people messaging me. Like, just a broad switch to just turn it off. Because you shouldn't necessarily force this on people, right? Like, it's not... I don't think Amazon's looking to change the world with this thing. They basically were trying to add a feature to their new camera device. And then they just said, well, we can just do this everywhere. On the drop-in, by the way, Amazon published a really good demo video. And I think this one was significantly better than the original Echo video, where they were kind of showing off what the device could do. And they showed some of the drop-in feature, right? I know I had problems with that drop-in feature last week. And it looks like that when you go to drop in on someone, they see like a really blurred view. So they can't just see you automatically, and you get the ability to stop it from happening. Like, you can say like, no, like don't let the person drop in. Yeah, so I think, okay, that looks much better than the original way that I thought it was going to be. Where people could just
a face appears.
Yeah, like they could just like you're doing whatever you're doing, and then your grandma's just like looking at you.
Yeah, right? It's like the Harry Potter scene when Sirius Black appears in the fireplace.
Exactly, it is just like that. Funnily enough, that was what I thought of when I first saw it. So yeah, I think that's good, and we should watch the video. I haven't seen the video; it's like a 5-minute video, and I think Amazon does a really good storytelling here. Like they really have a good way of showing how the product can be used, and they have something that I like more in this video than the previous video, a bunch of different families and people, so it can show different use cases. And it's pretty funny too, so it's worth watching, but it's good just to get a little bit more context around what drop-in's all about.
Yeah, it's just a weird addition, I think. The more I think about it, to have it in the app and everywhere. And I think a part of that too we haven't really mentioned is that the Echo, at least for those of us who live with other humans, is not necessarily like a personal device, right? Like I ask it something, my kids ask something, my wife wants it to start a song. We're all using it for different things, and it's not. Yes, it's tied to certain things of mine, but my kids don't know that they can add things to my to-do list from it. Mm-hmm. Just pray for me if that ever happens. But it's a communal device, and messaging by default is a very private thing. And so even though, the my nerd friends who have Echoes, who we've been playing with it this week, I know I trust them they're not going to send something terrible to me over the Echo messaging app. But if they did, I've got a house full of children. And there's that aspect of it too, that you're right, Mike, that it's sort of Trojan horsed in there, but it's also weird because it takes something personal communication and puts it, potentially in a non-personal environment. I think that's a little weird too. So we should move on. We have a link in the show notes to the Relay.fm blog. We have launched 2 new shows this week. The first is called Roboism. It is by Alex Cox. You may know Alex from things like Cards Against Humanity or Do By Friday, a podcast that's really great. And her co-host, Savannah Million, they talk about robots, artificial intelligence, machine learning, and how all of that stuff affects our culture. I think, for me at least, I think about sort of this stuff as like kind of out there in the future, but the reality is this stuff is now here in the present. And Alex and Savannah talk about that. It's a fortnightly show. It will be... it's a lot of fun. Episode 1 is out now. We also launched Originality. So Aline Sims, who used to host Less Than or Equal on the network, she's back with a new show with Kay Tempest Bradford. Tempest is an author, and they together are interviewing creatives about like the wheres, hows, and whys of creative genius, like where ideas come from and how you work on those ideas into like a finished work. And it's a really fun format. They're interviewing people, and then they like jump in and talk about the interview and go back to it. Really nicely edited. They're doing a really nice job on the production. If you enjoyed Mike's old interview show, which had like 6 names over the years,
I don't know why you have to be that way.
if you like that sort of programming, I think you would enjoy Originality. It's also fortnightly, so neither of those are weekly. You got plenty of time to get them in your schedule.
Can fit them both.
And go check them out.
And while we're on the news front, continuing the year of live that we've spoken about, there's going to be a London meetup, a London-based meetup for 2/3 of the Connected podcast on Friday, June the 2nd. It's going to be the first link in the show notes this week will be to get tickets if you want to go get tickets. Me and Federico are going to be in town back at the Big Chill House on Friday, June the 2nd from 7 to 10 p.m. The tickets are free. So you can go and sign up and come along and say hi to us as we get prepared to head off to San Jose the next day.
Yeah, last year was awesome.
It was a lot of fun.
And, it was actually, I think, my first time meeting any kind of podcast listener. And it just made it so real. And everyone was so happy and so kind. It was one of the highlights of my entire trip to WWDC, so I cannot wait to do it again. And I'm very happy that we're doing it again.
So if you want to be a highlight of Federico's trip, come get a ticket and hang out with us in London. We have limited availability, and they're going to go quick, so if you're listening to this episode and you want to come, click that link right now.
I will not be there.
No.
That day is actually my 10-year wedding anniversary, so we're...
Congratulations all around, then.
So you guys have your meetup.
Can we buy a ticket to that also, Steven?
No.
Okay. Too bad.
Moving on. That's moving.
Will you be inviting listeners along to your dinner or anything? Or no?
Yeah.
Oh, we're all good.
Yeah. We'll be at this bed and breakfast. Please don't come.
Yeah, we'll give you the link so you can stay away.
Yeah. So we have sort of a mini topic before we get in, and this has been floating in our document for a while, so my apologies to listener Jessica. She wrote this in weeks ago, but we're finally getting to it, and I thought it'd be an interesting conversation in light of what we're going to talk about today with iOS 11. And so Jessica writes, what's going on with the iPod Touch? We have 2 in our household for the kids, and they are aging. I assume she means the iPod's Touch are aging and not the kids, maybe both.
Both?
But we're not going to replace them, again, hopefully talking about the iPod Touch, but we're not going to replace them with something last updated in 2015. It's got an A8 chip, but is that good enough these days? Should we get that new cheap iPad and move on from this? What's the deal, Apple? So I agree with Jessica that this is weird. There's the $329 iPad. The iPod Touch is older. It got that update, but it's still like the smaller screen size, and cameras aren't as good, and it just really seems like it's fallen from grace over the years. What do you guys think?
I think that if you're interested in having this kind of device today, that you're better placed with an iPad of some kind. I really don't think that the iPod Touch is long for this world, honestly. I can't see it.
Yeah. I mean, they are cheaper. They can start at $199 for the 16 gig.
Sure.
But I agree with you. Like, you know, when they first announced it, the world was very different, right? The iPhone was basically only on AT&T and only in the United States. But that's not the case anymore. The iPhone is everywhere. The iPad didn't exist. It exists now. And I think just those devices have really squeezed the iPod Touch sort of out of the line almost. That it's still around, but it feels like it's a legacy product. And, you know, the days are gone where the iPod Touch was as good as the newest iPhone all the time. I mean, I'm looking in Mac Tracker, and they released an iPod Touch like every September for several years. And then it just slowly, you know, those gaps got wider and wider, and now it's been coming up on 2 years. I think the moral of the story is probably don't buy one. That's my thought. That's what I would say.
Yeah, I wouldn't buy an Apple Touch. I mean, just get an iPad Mini, I guess. What's the difference in price again?
The iPad Mini is like $399 or $499. I'm looking.
If it's $399, that's, you know, $70 difference. I mean, you get, you know, games would be bigger and the screen would be slightly bigger. I mean, not slightly, but still not as huge as an iPad Pro. I mean, I wouldn't get an iPod Touch. I would just reuse iPad Minis and maybe iPad Airs if you can. Maybe get a refurbished model of those.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
The iPad Mini, I remember now, they only sell one model. It's the 128 gig for $399. And so if you know, from the base iPod Touch to the Mini is a big jump, but that cheap iPad and, like you said, maybe refurbished iPads are in there in the middle somewhere. Yeah. I think that's what you should probably do.
Yes.
I think that's our collective advice is say goodbye to the iPod Touch.
Yeah, I mean, who knows, right, what they might end up doing with it. But I'm just saying I would be really surprised if it was anything other than silently going away.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, another thing would be if you really like that size, I'm sure that you could probably get relatively cheap iPhones, right? Like 5Cs and 5Ss and stuff like that, which might stick around for a little bit longer. And just don't put SIM cards in them and you'd probably be okay. Yeah,
it's always a good option too.
Well, we don't know. Maybe listener Jessica, she's a billionaire and she wants to buy iPhone 7s to the kids.
That's true. You could do that too.
That could be.
Yeah, that is the billionaire's option.
If you're a little more price conscious, I would say go for a refurbished iPad, and, you know, whether it's a Mini or an Air, it's still better than the A8 chip in the iPod Touch. So,
do you mean more price conscious than a billionaire? Like, I think they were the two options you were posing. Either a billionaire or you're more price conscious.
She could be a millionaire. I mean, in my mind, you're either price conscious or you're a billionaire. You know.
No middle class.
That's a way of looking at it.
What's the middle class anyway?
Today's show is brought to you by Squarespace. Enter the offer code WORLD at checkout and you'll get 10% off your first purchase. It is time to make your next move with Squarespace because they let you create that website that you have for your next idea. Every idea needs a website. Every idea needs a domain. Every idea, trust me, needs a beautiful template to display it in. Award-winning, you may say. What about 24/7 customer support? That is what is available to you if you sign up for Squarespace. If you have any issues while you're trying to get your website up and running or anything from then until eternity, you can contact Squarespace's team. They are there 24/7. Whenever you need them, they will be there to help you. With Squarespace, you will be able to create an online store, a blog, a portfolio, a site for your restaurant, maybe a site for your band where you could have the music playing. No matter what type of website you want to create, Squarespace have all of the tools that you need to put it together. I have used Squarespace for so many things right now. Like right now at Relay FM, we use Squarespace for our blog and our store because they do that stuff better than we ever could. You can go and check it out right now. Squarespace plans start at just $12 a month, but you can sign up for a free trial with no credit card required by going to squarespace.com. With Squarespace, there's nothing to install, no patches to worry about, no upgrades needed. They have got all of that stuff covered. Once you've played around with Squarespace and you decide that you want to sign up, you want to use the offer code WORLD, WORLD, to get 10% off your first purchase, and we'll also show your support for Connected. We thank Squarespace for their support of Relay FM. Squarespace, make your next move, make your next website. All right, so Mr. Federico Vitici, you have gone ahead and done it again and created an iOS concept video. Now, this is something you did for the first time last year, right?
Yes, the concept video and the mockups were the change from last year with iOS 10. For context, I've been doing my annual iOS wishlist since the days of iOS 6, so when iOS 5 was the current OS, I published my first article in this series called iOS 6 Wishes. That was 2012, and I've been doing this since for every iOS version. Last year with iOS 10, in addition to my wish list, we also did a concept video to visualize the wishes themselves and to sort of give people a better idea of what I had in mind. And this year we've done it again. There's a new concept video. We're talking about iOS 11, of course, but the twist is because I feel that the iPad is more behind than the iPhone in terms of attention and in terms of power, power user features. This year, my iOS 11 wishes and concept video are all about the iPad and the future of the iPad.
And I guess at this point right now, we're all pretty confident that, and hoping, but also a little bit confident that this will be Apple's tact as well, right? That the iPad's going to get some serious love at WWDC.
I think so. And I know, and it's almost like multiple people seem to know this and to agree upon this, that iPad features were supposed to come out earlier than the situation that we're in right now, which is basically it's 2 years since iOS 9 and almost over a year and a half after the original iPad Pro. And it wasn't supposed to be this long, but whatever happened, now we're at the stage where WWDC is upon us, and maybe there's going to be a visual refresh of iOS, in general on the iPhone and the iPad, but really Apple is gonna have some iPad love to share at WWDC.
There was something that you said in your article that I really liked. You said iOS for iPhone is, I believe, at a point of sufficient maturity. The iPad now bears the proverbial low-hanging fruit of iOS.
Yeah, I mean, I find that hard to disagree. If you consider the iPhone and iPad advancing simultaneously, you could say that the iPhone is at least a couple of years ahead of the iPad. If you look back at iOS 9, there was the point when Apple stopped, I don't want to say caring about the iPad, but making features and designs and, thinking about iPad users as a different type of users than the iPhone average customer. And over the past 2 years, the iPhone has advanced. With iOS 10, we got some amazing features for the iPhone, and we got the iMessage, for example, was clearly optimized for the iPhone. The stickers initially they didn't even work on the iPad in split view, and instead we didn't get any iPad only feature, because I think the main difference here to bring up is it doesn't matter if Apple releases the same option on both platforms and they're gonna say, well, this amazing iPhone feature also works on the iPad, because I think iPad users need and deserve some iPad only and iPad first functionality that truly takes advantage of the bigger screen and the different type of device. Otherwise, every feature, every design is just going to be an adaptation from the iPhone. And so I think there's so much more potential to change things on the iPad. And there's so much, and this is a point that I make in the story, there's so much missing functionality, really, from the iPad. The iPhone, you could argue, well, Apple is going to do something new, maybe a new design, maybe some new system apps, but you cannot really say, well, this is absolutely missing from the iPhone. And I feel like the same is not true for the iPad. There's stuff that is clearly missing from the iPad right now.
So let me play devil's advocate for just a second. I agree with you. I think the iPhone point in particular is very well said. And I think it would benefit Apple to treat the iPhone and iPad more independently of each other, and maybe not as far as splitting the OS, but like really focusing on them as what they are. But as the resident Mac user on the show, before I lost Mike, I can't help but think that that iPad users are being a little bit finicky with some of this stuff. That, yeah, it's been 2 years, but this stuff takes time. And I was just thinking back over the course of OS X's life, and iOS is now 10 years old, and it is not as far along as Mac OS X was, but Mac OS X had a head start, right? And I think that someone looking at the two of you saying, well, this is ridiculous, you guys are spoiled, like, quit whining, it's only been 2 years, the Mac's not getting this sort of attention anymore. I don't think that's fair of those people. And they're my people saying it, but I think it's unfair because the Mac got a head start, right? The Mac was built upon Next Step and stuff from the classic Mac OS. And so you had things like copy and paste out of the box. And iOS, they had to add that. It took them 2 years, and they finally did it in iOS 3. But I just think as we move forward, if you are a Mac user listening to this and you think that Federico and Mike are being silly for complaining that it's been 2 years since they've gotten an update, then I just don't think that's fair, because iOS is still a young OS. The Mac is much more mature, and this is something Mike wrote in the show notes, so I'm going to steal it. That it would be difficult for us to sit down and make a list of needed features and improvements like this for Mac OS. I mean, I've been working on like a Mac OS 10.13 wish list. And to be honest with you guys, like, it's pretty short. Like, the Mac is mature and stable, and most of the stuff I want on that list is actually like dialing back some of the new stuff or like tweaking stuff they've added, but the core is good. Whereas iOS is younger and has more room to grow because of it. So I just kind of wanted to clear the deck if people out there thinking that, because I think it's a little unfair.
Yeah, I think it's a valid point. I just disagree with the premise that it's only been 2 years, especially from a company that tries to sell the iPad as the future, and then you stop for 2 years. That's a very long time if you truly believe that something is the future of computing. And it's not like we're talking about some low profile startup with some small team working on this. We're talking about Apple and the CEO going out and saying, well, we believe this is the future of computing for everyone. And I just struggle to reconcile those statements with 2 years of effectively pause on the iPad software. And I know that this stuff takes time. And it's not the end of the world, right? It's not like Apple didn't ship features for the iPad and now we're all upset and we're going to switch to Linux. That is not the case. But it needs to be said that it's been 2 years and it is time for something new. And I know that, that Mac users have been waiting for longer, but it's also much more, I think it's been around for a long time. And right, like you said, it's hard to come up with new ideas and wishes of things that are missing from the Mac because it's so mature at this point.
Yeah, I mean, something as simple as, well, not as simple, but something as sort of basic as window management. And we're getting ready to get into this with like some of the split view stuff. But if you look at the Mac, Apple introduced Spaces and Expose years ago. I think Expose was like 10.3 or 10.4, and then Spaces was in Leopard. And now they sort of like smashed all that into Mission Control, and then they redid Mission Control, and they need to redo it again because it's still not really good. But they're sort of like taking the pieces they already have and rearranging them, where iOS, they need to bring some of that stuff to it in the first place, right? The split view was a good first step, but they need to move beyond that now. So I just think it's not an apples to apples comparison between the two operating systems.
And also, like, all of the stuff that we're going to talk about, all of the stuff that Federico has written about, is just new ways, new ideas of doing things that already exist on desktop platforms, right? Like reimagining some concepts for how they would work on a touch interface to get work done. Right? These aren't like brand new pie in the sky things for the most part. It's like finding ways to bring needed features to iOS that currently exist in macOS and in Windows, right?
Right.
So it's not, we're like give us feature parity is what we want, or or concepts, right? Like the concepts. So like drag and drop, which is the first one we're going to talk about. Like there isn't a way to drag and drop something from thing to thing in iOS, right? From app to app, from app to file system, or anything like these. This doesn't exist, and boy, would it be nice. So let's talk about it. Federico, you conceive of an idea of drag and drop. So kind of from your perspective, what do you think that drag and drop looks like on iOS?
This is the feature that we also showcased last year in the iOS 10 concept video. And this year we had time to refine the idea and to maybe consider all of the implications. So the basic idea is it should be super simple and it should be intuitive for users. Imagine split view, for example. You have two apps open at the same time, and you want to get some text or maybe an image from the app on the left to the app on the right. Right now, there's really no easy way or intuitive way to do that on iOS 10. You either have to copy the image to the clipboard and then paste in the other app. Sometimes it works, other times it doesn't work, or you need to use an extension. So you need to go through a bunch of different places and sort of rely on workarounds to move data. With drag and drop, I feel like the obvious solution would be you just hold down on the text that you want to move or the image that you want to, bring into the other app, and you just move it. You just drag it there. You grab it, you move it, and you drop it. And I feel like Apple nailed this idea decades ago on the Mac, and it's been around since forever. I think actually, Jeff Raskin invented the click and drag behavior on the original Macintosh, and it's a proven, it's a solid idea that I feel a lot of people say, well, drag and drop, it's a desktop feature, it's made for the mouse, it doesn't make sense on a mobile touchscreen. And I think the argument doesn't make any sense, because if you think about it, on desktop computers, you're using an abstraction, a metaphor of your hand, which is the trackpad and the mouse cursor on the screen, to select objects and move them around. Mm-hmm. On iOS, you could actually hold the objects on the screen and swipe physically with your finger to move data around. And so that's the simplest implementation. But then in the concept and in the article, I explained, maybe you don't wanna drop an item into an app right away. Maybe you want to save it for later, or maybe you don't know the app that you want to drop it in, so you want to open the multitasking switcher and select an app icon while you are already holding an item. And of course, there are multiple types of items that you could drag. Text and images are obvious, but what about a PDF document? What about a Safari web page? Or what if you want to drag and drop a location from maps? So there's this whole system that will require a framework, like a system-wide framework and an API from Apple. It's a big effort, to support multiple content types and to tell developers, here's an API, here's how your app can support these two methods, allowing the users to hold down and select a piece of content, and being able for your app to receive content that is dropped by the user. There are multiple implications, and it's super difficult if you think about, the technical aspects. I went back and I actually tried to read the document of, I think it was called Drag Manager on System 7. It's a PDF that is still available on apple.com for some reason. And to give you the idea that this is stuff that Apple has been thinking about for a long time. Apple, back in the System 7 days, they referred to item flavors. So, for example, if you have an item that is text can have multiple flavors. It can be plain text or it can be rich text. If it's rich text, maybe it's got some formatting, so you got to account for that. And there are all these different variables that if you enable drag and drop, so if you enable this direct communication between two apps, you got to have effectively a language to let those apps understand each other. So hopefully there will be an API and there will be a modernized implementation of this stuff that Apple has been doing for over 20 years, basically.
I want to come back to the developer point in a second, but there's something that I want to drill down on, which I think is really interesting, which is the idea of multi-touch, right? And you kind of... You've glossed on it a couple of times. It's the idea of, like, if you imagine two apps in split view and you have notes on one side and you have a web page on the other, and you want to drag an image from a web page. If you were doing this, you could pick it up and you could drag it, and you could hold it down the bottom and it starts to scroll, right? But what you would be able to do on iOS is you could scroll the other application with your other hand, right? Like the idea of being able to like pinch and zoom and move around whilst you're holding a piece of content, continuing to manipulate the screen. You say like you could go to the home screen, you're still holding it with your other hand. You could pick another app, you can drop it in. Like the idea of having effectively multiple cursors on screen is really nice. Right, and I'm sure you'd be able to do like what you can do on macOS. Let's see, you could pick up a file, hold it, wait for the file to open, drop it in, right, that kind of thing. But on iOS, you could actually be manipulating all of that stuff manually and quicker because you're able to tap around. And I think that is a very compelling idea for me. One thing that I really, really hope for and that I get concerned about when I think about this is I really, really, really want there to be the ability to drag and drop files and not just content. Right, like files is a really important one, and I do foresee a world in which drag and drop is launched without that, and it's just content to start. Like I can see that, but I really hope that they do the whole shebang. I want to come back to the developers though. This is the risk for me. This is the real risk point about if they're going to do this right. There needs to be APIs and, as you say, would require explicit adoption. Application developers would need to write the stuff to make this happen. So content can be shared from app to app. And like with document pickers, applications can say what types of files they can accept and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. If you look at split view and how long it took companies to adopt split view, if at all, with their iPad apps, this is where I start to worry about the adoption rates for these types of features.
Well, the good news maybe is that while split view was a massive problem for some companies such as Google that relied on custom interface frameworks and had to redraw their entire UIs and to make them work and support the size classes on iPad. Whereas I think if Apple wants to do a drag and drop API, they should take most of the work away from the developers. So Apple should have their own system, their own language that can understand content types. So there needs to be a system that the developer doesn't have to build it. The developer needs to be able to say, look, this is some text, there you go, do whatever you want with it. Or this is a text field in my app, it supports rich text and plain text. Now I'm just going to wait for some text to be dropped and then I'm going to take care of that. But the system that, lets two apps communicate, that needs to be provided by Apple. And so in theory, at least in my mind, and I'm not a developer and I'm just I'm trying to make reasonable assumptions as to how this could work. But I imagine there should be a layer in the middle that is made by Apple that says, well, I'm looking at an image right now and it's a photo that comes from Safari. It's a JPEG. It's a 2 megabyte object. And on this other end, there's a text editor and the user is about to drop an image into a text editor. Now, what do I do? The system, the API provided by Apple on iOS should say, well, an image cannot be plain text. So I'm just going to assume that maybe the user wants to insert the link to the image from the web, or maybe if the image is not, a photo from a web page, but what if it's a photo from an email client? It doesn't have a link. Well, let's just use the file name of the image in plain text. So this abstraction, this communication, this translation occurring between two apps, that must be done by Apple, and that shouldn't be work that the developers need to account for. But still, there should be an API for developers to integrate with this. And that is where your concern might comes in. How long is it going to take Google to allow users to select some text in Google Docs and drop it into Apple Mail? Or is Microsoft going to take 2 months to enable dropping of images and videos into OneNote? That I'm afraid I cannot answer for you.
I think the idea of having a piece of content and then manipulating the OS underneath it is really interesting. On the Mac, you can click down and have like a text document, and then look at my keyboard. You can hit F3 to go into mission control, and then drag that piece of content on top of any open app, and If it can open it, then it opens it, and if it can't, then it can't. But this is an area where they can break from the phone, right? The phone is one app at a time, and most of the time one-handed. But the iPad is not that way, right? You can have it on your desk, or you can have it in the keyboard case, and you can use both hands with it. And I think it's a really interesting example of taking something from the desktop world, and the fundamentals are the same, but changing the interaction so it's touch native. And I don't know, I like that you led with this in the article, because I think it's the best example of that. Something we all understand and know and use every day on our computers, that run desktop OSs, but on our computers that run mobile OSs, we can't do it. And a way to kind of bridge that divide. And I think you've done a good job at explaining it and showing it in the video, for sure.
Yeah, and look, this is stuff, again, that it's going to sound so obvious to longtime Mac users or Windows users that DOS is able to account for those scenarios where the drag and drop leads you to unexpected places, such as dropping an image into an address bar, or, doing some conversions from rich text to plain text. This is obvious on macOS, but it still hasn't been done on iOS. And it will require so many additions. Even if you simply consider rich text that doesn't have a real framework on iOS, and that still cannot handle basic stuff like let me paste a table in an email client, or allow me to keep my formatting as I copy and paste text between apps. So there's so much work that Apple should be doing here, and that could be the reason why it's taken them 2 years, because it's a very complex system, it's a very complex feature, and I assume it's gonna be a very complex API, but it's not impossible. It's been done before. It could be updated for the era of touch and multi-touch, especially. And even if you look, for example, this is it's a footnote in my story, but Apple just acquired a company that made an app based on an engine called Content Graph. That its very main feature was, I'm able to understand multiple content types and to automatically translate them. And that was the core feature of Workflow. Now, I don't think that Workflow was acquired to power drag and drop, but it sure is nice to have the expertise of a team now at Apple that truly understands this stuff.
So you took drag and drop one step further than you did last year with the idea of the shelf. What is the shelf?
So the idea is the shelf is a temporary place to hold something for later. And this super generic description is meant to be generic, because the shelf is not meant to be an app or a location in iCloud Drive. Think about this. When you use drag and drop on the Mac and you want to quickly store something for later, because you don't know right away where, whether it's text or a photo or a link, should go. Usually, most people, I would argue, they just drop it onto the desktop or anywhere else in the Finder. And that's a great feature of the Mac, because you can just take something and be, okay, I'm not sure what to do with it. I just know that I'm going to need it later at some point. So let me just drop it there. It's like leaving something on the table as a reminder. And if you consider bringing drag and drop to iOS, it just made sense to me to have this kind of, transient dock, if you will, where you can just drop stuff and take care of it later. So we imagined this feature as you start drag and drop, you select something and you start dragging. But if you go over the upper section of the screen, there's this shelf that comes down and reveals all of these slots. It's like a tray where you can drop stuff. And you drop an item, the shelf closes again, and now that item has been temporarily archived. Now, maybe a few minutes pass, maybe a couple of hours pass, you remember that you clipped an item into the shelf. Now you're writing an email message, you need that PDF or that image again. Just open the shelf with a 3-finger swipe, you grab the item again, and you bring it into your email message or Pages document or, note, whatever. It's a way to sort of marry the simplicity of drag and drop with a way to taking the burden of having to decide right now where something should go from the user. So it's a way to let them quickly archive, store, whatever you want to define it for later, and take it back when they need it. And I'm not sure that this is something that Apple is gonna do this year, but I continue to think that it makes sense to me to have something like this to help you doing drag and drop on iOS. Because there's no desktop, there's a home screen, but do you really want stuff on your home screen? I think a shelf would be much more elegant.
Yeah, I really like the fact that you can, the idea that you would be able to access it anywhere with the three-finger swipe. I think that's a really, really key part of it.
Yeah, and again, it's taking an idea, but updating it, right? Something like drag thing. Or you can even do this with like Apple's dock, kind of.
Yeah.
Or like, a lot of people, like I do, have like folders in their dock. So I have Dropbox and I have downloads in my folders in my dock. I can quickly get things in and out of them. But yeah, I mean that's kind of a complaint I have now with iOS, and I've spoken about this before, that if I go to make a PDF to upload to the web, I've got to put it somewhere, right? I've got to upload it to iCloud or send it to Dropbox or put it in documents. Like, I got to put it somewhere. And if this is a way to kind of like stick a file somewhere temporarily and then come back and get it, it can make that workflow much faster without having to go out to the document provider and then back in. And I think absolutely, if drag and drop and these other features are coming, this is sort of part of it. Like, it's part of the same system of, hey, I've got something, I need to move it somewhere. And sometimes that means I need a temporary resting place, like you said. Sometimes I don't know quite where it's going. Or, for me, like, I keep my desktop very clean right now. The only thing on it is a text file where I'm keeping up with titles for the show since we're not live this week. It's the only thing on it. And I know that because it's on my desktop, it's important. And when I'm done with it, it will go away. And I think some people would use the shelf like I do, like I use my desktop. And other people, of course, are going to have 10,000 things in it. So Apple needs to make sure that it scales better than iMessage apps did last year. But it's a really interesting idea to have a space on iOS as a little temporary holding bin that you can come back to later.
Yeah, and we try to think of ways to minimize management. So, for example, we imagined you could tap on an item that's been already saved in the shelf to maybe have a quick look preview of the item before saying, well, I know that I clipped this PDF, but what's it really about again? So you can just tap it again, you see a preview, and then you can decide what to do. Or, for example, if you saved a location or, like an address from Apple Maps, you could preview the location directly from the shelf with a tiny quick look model preview. And then you could do things. And if you follow that idea, then maybe developers could provide their own quick look extensions. So, for example, let's say that I want to add a sheet from Ulysses into the shelf. Well, really, what is a sheet? It's not like an open file format. So maybe the Ulysses folks, they could provide a quick look extension that says, if the user clips a sheet from the app into the shelf, we can provide our own preview to the quick look panel. And so the user can still preview the sheet outside of Ulysses and from the shelf. And there would be, for example, a way to expand the shelf and to select all of the items and sort of purge everything and delete all. I try to think of multiple ways to sort of enhance the shelf and to have these little shortcuts without having to make it too complex or too complicated.
So one very obvious set of features would be a redesign to the Split View app picker, which was, it was an incredible thing. Like Split View, and it still is to a point, right? Like Split View is what made the iPad a viable work machine for me. Like it brought me to the platform and it keeps me there. Like as I was writing these show notes in Split View, right? Like I had Google Docs on one side and I had the web browser on another side, right? Like it's exactly what I need, right? It does, it fulfills the job, but it has some room to grow now that it's kind of gotten a little bit long in the tooth. And this is a list of the enhancements that you suggested from your article. So to be able to arrange the most used applications that you have on a grid, similar to like a mini home screen that would appear when you invoke the Split View, an integrated spotlight so you could search for applications or maybe even content, right? So you'd be able to just open that straight up. The picker view could be displayed on either side of the screen, which would be really great, right? So you could pull it in from the left or the right. Recently used applications could be displayed at the bottom of the picker as like cards, as it easier recents. Like what it currently is basically like a version of recents, right? But like to still have that, but to minimize it and have also a system where you could choose what you want to be showing. Spring loading for items that are passed via drag and drop. So you could drag and drop to something in split view and it opens the application, right? You just hover it over the app. And the split view picker could be invoked and navigated with an external keyboard. I would praise the Lord if they enabled that, honestly. So this is kind of like a good breakdown of the features. And I think this is, all of these things are clear to me as they are to you, Federico, as someone who gets their work done on this device every day, to the point where, like, if we don't get at least most of these, I will be really, really surprised.
Yeah. Again, I try to sort of modernize and think more deeply about what we did last year. This idea of you can have a grid of icons and you can have your recent apps. We already explored the idea last year, but we try to make it a little prettier, maybe. With the way that the recents go at the bottom, it's like a scrollable tray, and it matches the same order of recent apps from the multitasking switcher, the one that you get if you double-click the home button. That would be the same order of recent apps, and then you have this mini home screen that by default, I imagine, it could be the same layout of the actual home screen, but then you can modify. You can drag items in different order if you want to have a specific placement in split view, for example. And we try to account even for the potential problems that this concept would have, not just the changes and the good stuff, but also the bad stuff. If you can show the split view picker on both sides, what happens if you have the same app on two sides? And so we thought maybe if the user already has Notes, for example, Apple Notes, open on the left side, and the user opens the split view picker on the right side, the Notes icon should be dimmed. It shouldn't be selectable or tappable because it's already open. So we try to account for all of these potential problems, and then we thought, it makes sense to support drag and drop with this system. If the user starts dragging and they don't have an app open or they want to switch apps, we have multi-touch, we have drag and drop. Why not, bring in drag and drop to the split view picker? So we thought there should be two ways to do this. Either you drop something into an app icon and then the app provides a quick action menu, or you spring load the app icon and the app opens and you scroll to whatever you want to drop an item into. And the quick action idea is we had in the video an example. You select a bullet list from an email message. So we by the way, we came up with this concept of the video. It's about planning a vacation to Barcelona. We had the idea of, instead of showing a bunch of distinct standalone features, let's try to have like a day in the life sort of theme for the video. So we're showing someone how a better iPad software could help this family plan a vacation to Barcelona. And so at some point in the video, there's this email message, and a member of the family is reminding everyone to bring sunscreen and the iPhone charger and the adapter cable. And so we show the user selecting those lines of text, dropping them onto the reminders icon in the split view picker. And reminders parses these lines of text and shows a quick action menu that says, I found 4 items. Do you want to add those 4 new reminders to your list? So it's stuff like that, to enhance the split view picker, not just with the redesign interface, but also with support for other system features, whether it's drag and drop or extensions or, keyboard navigation. I think if Apple does this, they should just support everything, because especially for iPad Pro, it's right there in the name. You want to help pro users. This is how you help pro users.
All right, let's take our second break for this week and thank Smile for their support of this show. Today I want to talk to you about PDF Pen. It equips you with everything that you need for more powerful PDF editing. And great news, the new PDF Pen 9 is now available, and it is the ultimate tool for editing your PDFs. You can upgrade to PDF Pen 9 today to go totally paperless and enjoy over 100 enhancements that will improve your PDF editing workflow. PDF Pen 9 comes with some great new features, including the ability to add notes, comments, and cloud annotations to your PDF documents, and even fill out and sign interactive PDF forms. You can access annotations and their content in the new sidebar, and copy annotation content as plain text. And you can also find and highlight all instances of a word in a PDF, which is really useful, along with being able to remove OCR text layers and create links to other PDF files. If you're looking for a PDF and you want to make sure something's in there, you can see all of the words within it. And that is the power of OCR that allows you to do all of that. You also have the option to export your PDFs in grayscale and to JPEG, PNG, PNG. Is it PNG or PNG? Who knows? And 1-bit TIFF files. PDF Pen Pro 9 enhances table of contents editing, adds OCR for Chinese, Japanese, and Korean, and you can also edit your documents wherever you are. Just use iCloud or Dropbox for totally seamless editing. PDF Pen is so important to the way that I get my work done. I use it on all of my devices, and it's because I sign a bunch of contracts, like quite a lot. I sign contracts, I create contracts, and PDF Pen is the way that I get the signatures ready. Like when I create a contract for someone, I'll create it in like Pages or whatever app I'm using, and I export it out to PDF Pen, and I can sign it, I can add my name, I can add the date, and then I send it off. And it's the same that when I receive a contract, it always goes into PDF Pen for me to sign and get it sent off. It's so easy, and I really, really do love this application. You can get everything you need for more powerful PDF editing by going to smilesoftware.com/connected, where you can find out more. Thank you so much to PDF Pen from Smile for their support of this show. So, Federico, Finder on iOS. This is a bold idea.
Yeah.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah. I think that, there's people that say the iPad or iOS, really, they don't need a file system. And I think that idea sort of lost all of its value years ago when Apple brought the new document picker and the document providers and the iCloud Drive app to iOS. Because right now, if you look at your iPad or your iPhone on iOS 10, you already have a file system. It's just different from the Mac. You don't have, of course, the desktop. You don't have Windows, but you do have a way to organize files and folders. You can create subfolders, and you can use apps as storage locations. So you can use Dropbox as a native provider in the document picker. You can switch back and forth between different locations. You do have a file system. It's just way too simple and way too fragmented right now to be as powerful as the Mac. And my argument is Apple should not just copy the Mac's Finder, because there are so many, at least from my perspective, so many problems with the Mac's Finder. The way that, the view settings are all kinds of weird, and really the problems of people going to delete files into places where they're not supposed to look at. But I think there's also plenty of good stuff that Apple should borrow from the file manager that they created decades ago, and that should, it would make absolute sense, especially on the iPad. I think the main idea that I try to convey in the video and the article is the Finder should be a unified place for everything. It should be a single place for iCloud Drive, for local storage, for storage locations from apps, and for document providers. And in fact, I also wrote in the story, I believe Apple should discontinue document providers such as Dropbox or Google Drive as, separate places. They should be just Finder extensions. And on the Mac, or Apple already has this kind of system. It's called Finder Sync, and it's an extension that allows apps to modify the native Finder behavior. And I think if Apple wants to do a native file manager on iOS, just unify all of these different bits that you already have, but make them easier and more powerful, and let them integrate safely and natively with the Finder. So, for example, Dropbox could be, a top-level destination in the Finder and use their own sync, use their own badges to indicate, status, and have native sharing features. Or people could use iCloud Drive, which would be the default location in the Finder. iCloud Drive should receive sharing, should receive tags, permission control, and all of the good stuff from the Mac should also be available on iOS. And finally, just make a decent interface. If you look at iCloud Drive right now, the app, which is the file manager from Apple on iOS now, it is terrible. It's awful. It's, I believe, the worst app that Apple released on iOS so far. The extension update that they did with iOS 10, I still cannot believe that it shipped. And it's up right there with the split view picker in terms of what is the worst stuff we've ever done on iOS. It's the split view picker and the add to iCloud Drive extension. So, add a serious interface, especially for pro users, icon view, column view, popovers, pop-ups to view more file information. There was, years ago when the iPad was so simple, I'm thinking iPad 1 or iPad 2, there was no split view, no multitasking, no keyboard shortcuts. It made sense to have everything so simple. But now we're at the point where one half of the iPad is meant for pro users. So you have split view, you have keyboard shortcuts, you have pro apps. And there's the other half, which is still for some reason stuck in the past, which is iCloud Drive and these document providers. And I think it would make sense to unify everything. And it kind of sounds like a paradox, but by making it more powerful, it would actually be simpler because it's just one place where people can do anything they want.
I think, too, this could be a stage for them to build other things upon. So things like USB or network storage, right? We talked ages ago about you can put an SD card in and pull photos off of it, but pulling audio files like from a mobile recorder is a lot more difficult. And if you're going to go through the trouble of building something like this, then have those things enabled, right? So I can easily browse other things on my network. So if I have a Mac server somewhere, I can browse that on my network and pull a file from it and then put it in iCloud Drive on my iPad. Like, make the iPad aware of the world around it a little bit more as far as storage goes. Because right now, the only way to do that is to use something like Dropbox or iCloud Drive to copy it there and then let that cloud service take care of it for you, where really a lot of people, I think, just have files on their computer that they may want on their iPad and not deal with like the desktop and document syncing they put into macOS Sierra, which is like buggy and weird, and if you get it wrong, can go terribly sideways on you. But it's like, make this thing extensible in a way that is useful to all sorts of different types of setups.
Yeah, I completely agree. Like, the idea of being able to have access to all of these files and they kind of all have parity in that they can all be in there, right, from all my document providers, that is exciting to me as an idea. You know, like, even if, like, I don't know if how this kind of thing would work, but like if applications, I've wondered, well, like, applications can't be document providers. You know, like, maybe that's getting a bit too weird and complicated.
Well, they can. I mean, you can use, like, you can pull stuff in and out of like the Documents app or
so let me say then more of them should be then, right?
Yeah.
Because like, for example, I had something in Word and needed to get it, and it was like, Word should be a document provider.
Yeah.
Just so I can grab it out of Word. So maybe that would be like an interesting way to do it, right? Where like the iCloud portion of it or something like that, you just go into each application or whatever and grab the files out of them. But that, I don't know, it could be a bit weird. But
yeah.
Okay, so there you go. Today I learned. I thought that there had to be like always like a cloud service.
No, there's not many apps that have done it. I mean, to your bigger point of developers don't always adopt the stuff quickly.
Yeah.
I can count probably on like one hand of the apps I've come across that do this.
Yeah. And really, because the API can be so weird for doing the document stuff. And for years, it's been so flaky with so many bugs. I've been talking to developers. Many of the features that Apple released with iOS 8 had problems that weren't fixed until later in the iOS 8 cycle or in iOS 9, really. And so I think, if Apple is going to do this, there needs to be a new API, and they need to stop with doing this system of, here you go with the document picker. Now you need to select one from these destinations. So you can go into this single interface and do whatever you want. But then if you exit, you lose the file that you selected. So I think Apple solved these problems years ago on the Mac with the Finder. But there's also the counter argument of the Finder is too difficult to use for most people, which I do believe is true to an extent. And so there should be a middle ground, maybe. Not as simple and not as limiting as what we have now on iOS, but maybe not as complex as it is on the Mac. For example, I imagine in iOS 11, if you try to open a document, it shouldn't be presented with the iCloud Drive interface by default, and then you gotta tap on the locations button if you want to drill into document providers. You should just have a Finder with a sidebar that opens, kind of like the open file dialog on the Mac, and you have the sidebar. You can choose, well, do I want to go into iCloud Drive or Dropbox? And you can just tap once to change locations. You can have stuff like favorite apps or favorite folders, and you can just dig down and pick the file that you want. And that's it. You don't need to tap 10,000 times to change between 3 destinations. You can just navigate across this Finder UI. And so I think there should be a new extension system. There should be a new API. And apps really should be able to more easily open documents and data from each other. Right now, it is possible. For example, if you have a text editor like Ulysses, you can open and edit a file from working copy, which is a GitHub client. It's already possible today on iOS 10 to say, I have this app and I want to open and edit a file from another app, but it's so cumbersome and it's so slow. It should be easier and it should be done anywhere. And I believe a better interface is the first step. The second one would be make the file manager available anywhere. So I suppose there's going to be a Finder app on the home screen, like a whole layer done by Apple. And there should also be a new picker in every app, which is the Finder UI. Make it extensible, work with developers, work with companies like Dropbox and Microsoft. I don't want to say Google Drive because, Google. But try to understand the needs of pro users on iOS and make that kind of interface that wouldn't be as difficult as it is on the Mac, but would be much better than what we have today.
So you also took a look at overall iOS design, and you have some thoughts on maybe some messages that Apple have sent in recent versions of iOS?
Yeah. We try to take a look at what Apple did last year with Apple Music and with some changes in Apple Maps. And going back to my iOS 10 review, there was a point where I said there are multiple design languages coexisting in iOS 10 today. And I still think that is true. If you look at, not just icons, but really the use of cards, the use of buttons across apps like Safari and Mail, and then you look at Apple Music and Apple Maps and Apple News, they look like apps from 2 different companies. And I think, this year, I think we'll see a refresh of the iOS 11 interface. I don't know if it's going to be a groundbreaking major redesign like iOS 7 was, but I think there will be some new consistency. And so we try to imagine what that consistency mean. And we didn't spend a lot of time onto the design concept just because I prefer myself to focus on features and functionality. But I imagine, toolbar icons could be thicker, could be easier to see and to spot at a glance. There could be contextual animations on icons that are associated with actions. So the video opens with a possible redesign of the Apple Notes app with these thicker icons that sort of blend the current iOS style with the watchOS style. So when you tap on an icon, you get this little highlight on the button, and the icon also animates, which is kind of reminiscent of the Material style from Google, I guess. And it's a way to add context and to make it more accessible, to have these button shapes around icons. I think there's a lot that Apple could do to sort of liven up the iOS UI, to make it more contextual, to make it more accessible, and to make it more fun, which I think it's important, to make it fun. Even if it's a pro app, I think it's important to give it some personality. And I know that after looking at the icons that we did for Safari for Apple Notes, I went back and looked at the actual icons in Safari on iOS 10, and they looked so old to me. And I'm biased, of course, because it's our concept. But I would love to see the Apple Music and the Apple Maps, the Apple News style be more consistent throughout the entire iOS 11.
And then also, you kind of rounded up some smaller features that were interesting to me. And the idea, one of them is that the share sheet kind of needs some work. And you spoke about, as well as just making it a little bit better to knew what's going on, you also kind of had an idea of breaking extensions outside of the share sheet as well.
Yeah, this is probably one of the toughest sells from this concept, which is, right now, if you want to use an extension, whether it's a share extension or an action type one, you need to go through the share sheet. There's always this middle step of, okay, I know what I want to do, but first I need to tap the share icon and I need to scroll this list of extensions and pick the one that I want. And this slows you down a lot, especially if you use the same extension every time. You just need to go to this middle step every time. So I imagine, what if you could use, again, drag and drop to select an extension and manually drop it into a toolbar or an area of an app where you can drop in extensions. So I imagine, for example, having a 1Password icon in the Safari toolbar. So every time you need to log into a web page, you don't need to open the share sheet and then find 1Password. You can just tap on 1Password in the toolbar. It's like the Mac, but done in a way that it combines the current system with possible drag and drop, and it would save you a lot of time. But on the other hand, it would also require developers to support this feature. I would assume developers would have to provide an icon for toolbars or for other interface areas where extensions could be dropped. And there's the argument to be made about, by removing a step, you're possibly opening up the system to potential damage caused by the users. Because what if you accidentally tap on, a workflow extension and something happens and you didn't have the middle step of the share sheet to save you? So it's a trade-off, but I think it could be done in a way that, you make it so that only the user via drag and drop can mark an extension as a favorite. And so it wouldn't be done by the system that suddenly you have your toolbar filled with icons in the worst Windows nightmare from the old era. It would be done by the user manually every time. And I think, for example, you could have a OmniFocus extension directly in Safari, or you could have something like a Todoist extension right in the Mail UI. It's a way to make the share sheet more extensible and faster, combining it with drag and drop. But I don't know if Apple likes this idea or has played around with this idea.
Yeah, this is something that I would want in some of my applications, but I think of everything that you pose in the video and in the article, this feels like the least likely to happen for me. I really struggle to imagine Apple allowing the Yahoo toolbar to appear in a bunch of different applications,
I tend to agree. Yeah. And I think for that reason, because it puts the share sheet for all of its trouble, is kind of hidden away, right? And if you don't ever go in there or you don't enable a bunch of apps, you don't know how messy it can get. But to put that stuff like front and center in Apple's UI Chrome doesn't seem like something they're going to do. I mean, even though they do it on the Mac, but I think that on the iOS with less space and sort of more flexibility in the UI, I just don't quite see it happening there.
So you touch on the home screen becoming denser, which I completely agree with, right? Like filling up that home screen a little bit more.
Yeah.
You spoke about multiple audio streams, which is something that we've spoken about a bunch of times on this show. I don't think we need to rehash that, right? Like the idea of a new audio framework that can allow for simultaneous audio streams. So you could have a video playing and be listening to something else, or you could, as we want, record a Skype call or a VoIP call or a FaceTime call, so we could finally do podcasting on iOS.
If that happens, Federico won't need to buy a new Mac Pro after all.
That's very true. Mm-hmm.
I could just use my iPad and iOS 11. Yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense for not just for podcasters, but for musicians. Anyone who works with mixing apps that deal with multiple audio streams. Right now, they usually have to rely on stuff like Audio Bus, for example, to get audio streams from multiple apps into a single interface and editing UI. And I think that should be done at a system level. There should be an API that deals with, there's multiple streams occurring now, and you can control them, maybe via control center, maybe in another way, but there should be at least support at an API level for developers to be able to have multiple audio sessions going at the same time. Yeah.
Maybe a little bit more versatility and love shown to Notes.app. Like, for example, you pose like the ability to use the Apple Pencil anywhere in the application to just draw wherever you want, as opposed to entering drawing mode and then having this little image popped in.
Yeah.
Which is a little bit hacky when you think about it. Especially, you look at other applications like GoodNotes or Notability, right? You can do this with their applications. And also more sharing options, like support for sharing entire folders. And plus, I would like to see the sharing stuff improved. It's a little bit janky. Like a couple of days ago, me and Adina were sharing a note, and I was like, "Oh, press the AirDrop button to share this note." When you do it, you still have to enter contact information. I don't think you know what AirDrop is. It's a little bit
That's
weird.
That's such a weird thing.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe it's like a two-step, like you don't accidentally AirDrop a private note to someone on the subway, but
that's your, that's your problem, right? Like,
yeah,
click the right button.
no mercy in the UI.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think the drawing mode, the problem there would be for people like you, Mike, to add freeform drawing would mean you cannot control the interface with the pencil. That's the big problem here.
Yes and no. I use applications like GoodNotes and Notability, right? And there's a few ways you can do this. You can press a button, right? Like you can press the pen button and then you just start drawing. Or but also in applications that have a notes component to them, I'm mostly okay with the fact that I use my finger and then use the Apple Pencil, right? Like let me scroll the lists, but when I'm in the content of the note, like if I touch my Apple Pencil to the page and it draws something, like I'm mostly okay with that, right? Like I understand that, but most applications solve this by having you press a button, which will then kind of enable pencil mode, and then you can draw and you can use your finger, and then when you click it again, you can just use the pencil to navigate.
Yeah.
So there's an item here in the notes, and it just says that I have a confession. And now I sort of regret putting this in here because...
Oh, no.
No, go ahead.
Now I feel I have to come clean.
I feel like I know what it is.
You should confess.
Mike probably can guess what it is.
Steven, do you have a desire for work chat?
I have my notes in Evernote right now.
Oh, my God.
What?
Why are you doing this to me again?
Why?
Two big reasons. And one of them you go into in your article, Federico, that folders and subfolders in Notes on iOS is like a mess, and you can't create them there at all right now. And I ran into an issue, which is one issue I switched, is that I use folders and subfolders in Notes pretty heavily, and the Notes application on iOS would not, and the Mac would not ever save what folders were open and not. So I'd go in to look for something, and I have to like tap into a folder, tap into the subfolder, kind of like the opposite problem of iCloud Drive where everything's always expanded. And it was like a small thing, but just grated me endlessly. But I also have a lot of notes that have multiple attachments in them. So I'll like have some text and have a screenshot and have some more text and then a PDF and some more text and a screenshot. And Notes was just slowly breaking down for me in that it does a good job at handling attachments, and you have the attachment view, which is actually pretty nice. But I just kind of became increasingly frustrated with some of the way those things were laid out, and some of the lack of text control and some other things in there. And so I started by just moving one notebook into Evernote, and I have to say all the problems with Evernote are still there, but they have done a really good job at making it easier to work around. And so you can completely turn off stuff you don't want, and the syncing's really good. And I've been in here like 6 weeks, and honestly, like things are pretty good. And one thing I'd forgotten that I really liked, and one thing that I would like to see Apple address in the Notes application, is some idea of shortcuts. And so I have 3 notes that I get into, if not every day, at least 4 or 5 times a week.
Yeah.
And they're buried in subfolders somewhere. And in Notes, I'd have to go and find them or search for it. And I just need to be in there for a quick second just to put something in it and then get out. And Evernote has shortcuts. They sync across all your devices. So I go in, I can enter this one note, add the line of text I need for the day that it is, and then move on. And that speed for that particular use case is really nice in something like Evernote. So we'll see how long it lasts. I really hope Apple makes Notes more flexible. in iOS 11 and in Mac OS 10.13. But for now, like Evernote's been totally great. So there. I even, to show you the depths of my shame, someone asked for a screenshot of my iPhone, and I hit Evernote and put notes back in place because I don't want to get into it. Because it's somebody that you two follow, and you would see it, then I have to come clean to you then. But I've come clean to you now. I've confessed my sins, and it feels pretty good to have it off my chest.
We don't have time for this today.
I know. That's why I did it today. And I'm in charge of follow-ups. It's never coming up again.
Oh, God.
Next.
Moving swiftly on, and also, I think the last of the features that I saw you ending on a real high here. Some improvements to Mail.app.
Yes. Well, of all the system apps, I think Mail is the one that is the most behind the competition. There are some excellent clients on the App Store these days, especially I feel like after Mailbox went away, it was a chance for other companies to sort of not just rebuild Mailbox, but go even beyond. So even if you look at, Gmail, Outlook, Spark, Polymail, Newton, Airmail, of course, there are so many excellent choices. And if you try those apps and then you go back to Apple Mail, it just feels like it's an app from 10 years ago. And Apple hasn't kept up with the pace of innovation, I think, from others. And some features that have become commonplace these days, like you can snooze a message, or you can integrate with apps. You can have saved searches. That kind of stuff is still not available on iOS. So I feel like Apple is failing on two fronts with their Mail app. It is not as powerful as their Mac version, which does have features for pro users, such as smart folders and rules, and all of these other options that are not available on iOS. But they're also not keeping up with others. They're not following what other people are doing with snoozing, for example. And I think it is a chance this year for Apple to sort of redo their Mail app to make it faster, because it's still so slow. If you try to search for a message with a Gmail account, it's kind of terrible. Personally, I never can find what I'm looking for in Mail. And they should just extend it and allow developers to integrate with Mail, to bring in apps, and to let users more easily and more quickly manage their messages by integrating with apps, by snoozing messages, which has become really a de facto standard in email clients, and just make it a modern email client, because it's been 10 years of iOS, and Mail, I feel it's the app that has changed the least.
I totally agree. It really seems like it has been more or less forgotten about. And in the wake of, I mean, you just rattled off I don't know how many apps. In the wake of this huge, like clearly people want more, right? Or there wouldn't be a new Mail app every day. And right now, those features are reserved for people who are willing to put up with the pain of having a third-party email client. Mm-hmm. For a lot of people, that pain is worth those features, and it really seems like this seems really low-hanging fruit to me. Like, clearly, there's a demand for this. Apple could do it really nicely, and with some of the stuff like smart folders, they already have it. It's on the Mac, and bring that to iOS. But the search, man, I'm glad you brought up search. The search is so bad. I use a Gmail account and 2 Google Apps accounts in Mail, and I have the Gmail app installed on my iPhone because I need to search something. I go to it because 9 times out of 10, Mail.app can't find it. It's like, it's really sad. And like, the stuff is there. People always kind of point fingers at Google, doing non-IMAP stuff. Like, the reality is Google is the biggest, if not the biggest, probably one of the biggest email providers of iPhone users. Like, work with it better, have search that works, and then give us these things that clearly we all want.
Yeah.
So, Federico, how did putting the video together compare this year to last year?
Well, I started working on this almost 3 months ago. That's when I started my note of wishes that I wanted to come to the iPad. And I had the realization of I should focus on the iPad, I think around March. Initially, it was, I wanted to do both iPhone and iPad. But as I was putting together this outline, I just felt better about the ideas that I had about the iPad, and I was struggling to come up with iPhone stuff. And I thought that was a sign of, I should focus on the iPad because this is where Apple is most behind. And so I contacted Sam, and we got to work, and I think in mid-March, and we used Slack to communicate back and forth and to share mockups. Fun fact: we used to communicate with Telegram last year, and this year, it's been much better. Using
Oh yeah, Telegram. Remember that?
Yeah.
I remember that.
It's been much better, communicating and search in Slack. It's been super fun to look back at the concept and the mockups that we did. During the initial stages, Sam shared with me, I think it's called Marvel. It's like an interactive prototype tool. So I was able to sort of understand the interactions that he had in mind. And so we had these very rudimentary mockups for the split view picker and the shelf. And that was really fun because I could actually try and see the animations. That was very fun.
Marvel is very, very impressive. It's marvelous, you could even say, if you wanted to.
Oh, Mike.
Get out.
Say it. If you wanted to
done.
say it, you could say
Yes.
it.
Don't say it.
Yes, you're fired from the show. Also, I think Sam uses Sketch to build all of the assets. Like last year, the video was exported at 4K. I don't even know what kind of computer Sam has. I assume it must be a Mac Pro or an iMac. I know it's a Mac and he uses Sketch. And I don't know all of the other tools that he uses. He's going to have a behind-the-scenes type of stuff on the Cloud Mac Stories newsletter. So, it's going to explain this stuff much better than I can. But from my end, I had this shared note. We were talking about sharing in notes that I sent to Sam. And, I was looking at my ideas and it was organized in sections. And then Sam, a month later, came back to me with the same ideas, but done in a sort of storyboard structure. There were like scenes and ideas for cuts and zoom levels and transitions.
So professional.
Yeah, it was very professional. And from the get-go, we had this. I looked back and my first idea was we should do a day in the life kind of theme to show the changes in practice. Instead of just having a gallery of mockups and features, let's show how a typical workflow would look like. And Sam had the idea of why don't we plan a vacation to Barcelona, which is a city that we both love.
So nice that you two got on that vacation together, I guess, at the end of this.
Yeah.
It's really sweet.
Yeah.
So that is perfect. Let's plan a vacation to Barcelona. So we try to imagine all of the apps that could be used. For example, if you look, we have Duolingo in the shelf, which is the app to learn a different language. And there were some details that I'm really proud of in the video. For example, because it's a day in the life, the time in the system clock changes throughout the day to show you that it's the same person using the iPad throughout a day to switch between multiple apps in multiple sessions.
I'll tell everyone, we've got a smarty pants over here.
There's some other stuff like most of the changes in notes that they're not the highlight of the video, but they're there. Like they're better, rich links. There's new icons. There's the little animations, and we try to replicate the feeling of last year, but it's also kind of different. Last year, I tried to look back, and the core principle is the same, which is we should make a video that looks like something that could happen, that looks real. But last year, even the drag and drop stuff, it was based on the copy and paste menu. This year we went with a, more gestural sort of interaction. And it looks a bit different. It looks more new. And of course, the shelf is something that doesn't exist on iOS. So I think this year we had to balance the fact that we want to make a video that looks like something that Apple could do and that looks native to iOS, but we also have to invent these features because they don't exist right now. And so we spent a lot of time on making sure that those new features that don't exist wouldn't feel out of place. Because something that I don't like is when I look at concepts from other people, they look like something that it doesn't belong to iOS, and that is not what I wanted to build. And of course, as usual, I provided lots of comments and lots of notes to Sam, lots of bullet points in Slack and notes. And he iterated with the mockups, with the static images, and then he sent me back the animations, and then back and forth. It was very nice. Sam is a pro and he's a genius, so I'm very happy with the result. And Also, the music came from Sam. He gave me 2 choices, and we settled on this like epic beat this year. It's much more different from the happy music from last year, but I think it works.
Epic Beat, the name of the song.
I think it's called Epic Beat.
Perfect.
Yes,
Of course it is. Yeah, it really has the look and feel of something that could come from Cupertino in my eyes, right? Like I watch it and I'm like, you could fool me. So
actually, last year I was talking to a friend outside of Moscone, and it was like, I gotta tell you, a friend of mine texted me a few days ago, and he told me, "Oh, guys, I saw that you announced the new iOS 10," and my friend, he said, was talking about your concept. So we had to explain that. So thank you. Yeah, that's the idea. I mean, I don't want to fool people, but I want to make sure that, when you look at concepts, if they don't look native and if they break the illusion, you're just going to notice this is something that can never exist. This is something that doesn't make sense because I cannot picture it. And we want to make sure that you can picture it, that you can see it, how it would make sense. And that's why they need to look like Apple videos to us, because they need to make sense. They need not to fool people, but to be credible, to be reasonable. And I think if you cannot break the illusion, then you get people to start thinking and to start imagining things. And that's the beauty of a concept, that you can start a discussion.
All right, you can find links to all of this stuff in our show notes today, which are relay.fm/connected/142, or just go to macstories.net. This is incredible work from you and Sam again this year, Federico. So
thank you.
Bravo. And I guess this begins the preparation for WWDC.
Yes.
Right? Like this is the start. So we've got like 2 more episodes.
Yeah, it's coming up quick.
Stuff. It's coming up. It's all happening. So buckle up, everybody, I guess. Thanks to our sponsors this week, the fine folk over at Squarespace and PDF Pen 9 from Smile. You can find Federico online. He's at Viticci, Viticci. He's at appstories.net and macstories.net. And what other stories, Federico? Any other stories, or are we good? Just the 2?
This is all the stories that I have, yeah.
Allthegreatstories.net, apparently, as well, is where you'll also find him. You can go to 512pixels.net for Stephen's work, and he is at ISMH on Twitter. I'm at iMyke, IMYKE. We'll be back next week. Thank you so much for listening to Connected, episode 142. Until then, say goodbye, guys.
Arrivederci.
Adios.